This is my dad in World War I. And right here, in 1909, this was his first car, Pope Hartford. It's one of the original cars. And this is back in Stoughton, Massachusetts, about 18 miles south of Boston. And this is when he went into World War I. And he flew the de Havilland IVs. Now, these are actually all built in America. The de Havilland, of course, was a British design. But the engines in here were Sturtevant engines built in Boston. They call them Liberty. They were 420 horsepower. And if you look at that engine, if you get a chance on the test bed today or out in a museum, look at the intricacy. In other words, we just, in my opinion, haven't developed very much to say that. They had supercharged on, just beautiful design. And they were 420 horsepower and did pretty well. You notice there's two bays in this, but these were built in the United States, and those were the first bombers that actually dropped bombs. And my daddy said originally what they had 4 bombs, probably 20, 25 pounds, even less than that. They cut them with a pair of scissors. And he said probably very, very soon they had little levers that they could do it inside the cockpit. The fellow didn't have to reach out. And they had 2 on each side out on here originally. But this was the romantic position in the airplane, and all of the pilots and so alike had to take and get in the gunner's seat. And that was kind of an exotic picture everyone liked. And I'll show you a little more about the de Havilland here.
Now, let me ask you this one.
Oh, sure.
First, now he's got stripes on his, what's that?
That was the time in service, and I think you got one every year you were actually in combat service, yeah.
What rank did he reach to?
He was a captain when he came out, yeah.
Was there a unit number or anything that you know about him?
No, I don't. I got these originally from the military, and they were in brown tone. And all of these were pictures that he had and so on. This showed the British training aircraft. And this was kind of interesting over here, because these were pictures that I really didn't. They were in brown tones. And I found them, as I say, I sent them in Kotek many years ago. And I got them from the military. And this shows, in other words, the big deal was the submarines, of course, in World War I. And this shows the single stack destroyer. A lot of these are British, you see. And then over here, the 3 stackers, this thing and they used to put out smoke, to take and submarines. That was their main thing. And then they started to tow. See this the cable going up, and they would tow these balloons. And they had a fellow up here apparently with mirrors signaling down, in other words, telling the submarine here and there and so on. And of course, they were dumping smoke and everything. But submarine was their mortal enemy. And this was again but these balloons did real well. Now this is the Langley. The first airplane landed great all the way through, and this was actually the first picture. But the second one went through the barrier here. He came in a little too fast. But that was our first aircraft carrier.
Did you ever fly off a carrier?
On an AT-6, just some transition out in Long Beach Harbor. I think maybe 6 takeoffs and landings with the hook. That's which is nothing. Eh?
Now, one thing I was going to ask you, we didn't talk too much about you. At one time you were flying and you were pulling advertising and stuff. Banners?
Oh, okay. I didn't finish that. Okay, that was on the Reedville racetrack in Boston.
But you did that for a job? You got paid to do that?
Yeah, I got paid to do it, yeah. And we had a Spartan, which was made up in Denver, a high-altitude biplane. And it had about 220 horsepower, right engine, and almost the same engine that Lindbergh flew the Atlantic with, and used Griffin all-white shoe polish. And it was a windy day. It was marathon day, which would had to be in April. And I had flown 1 round in the morning, and I came back because I needed fuel. And I noticed oil dripping and so on it. And the lineman said, "Oh, hell, he's an oil dripping bastard," and so on. It was always that way. So I took his word for it. And I went out the second time, and it was a horrible wind blowing that day. It was probably 30 miles an hour, which was a lot for that. And I had the Reedville racetrack. There was nothing around it. In other words, houses and so on. And I noticed my oil pressure was going down. Didn't have an oil heater on the temperature of the oil temperature. And it started to go down. I felt a little like that, but not really. It started to go down. And hell, I realized, and then I put the 2 and 2 together, I was leaking oil. So I cut my banner. I lost my banner. We never did find that. And then I landed on the Reedville racetrack, which normally without wind it would have been kind of testy, but the wind had practically, that was the landing speed, which was maybe 40 miles an hour. So I landed, then I heard sirens coming. Of course, the police thought it was a joke I was landing on there. Then I explained what happened to that. We never did find the banner, and they tried to find it. But anyhow, the people at Wiggins Airways that owned the airplane, they sent the crash truck out, and we had it all done. This was probably 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and I think by 8 or 9 o'clock we had it in the hangar, putting it back together. Didn't hurt the engine, fortunately, and there was an interconnection between the 2 bottom cylinders where the oil went across, and there was a crack in it, and it kept getting worse. And that's what happened on that one thing.
Now, in those old days, or early days of aviation, there was barnstormers and.
Oh yeah, you had a lot of them. They had well, that was past the peak because they had mostly had the Jennies, J4NDs, but the barnstormers still. But they couldn't. They were cheap airplanes. They couldn't afford expensive airplanes. But they were truly the barnstormer, and they'd operate in and out of fields. Remember, no brakes or anything else, and as long as they could land in the wind.
But crowds would show up to those.
Well, what they would do oftentimes, I remember, you'd take an airplane, you had a row of trees, and you'd stand it on a block so the tail was up over, so you'd look on the highway and they would come running, they think it was an airplane crash. And then some of the other people, I remember all the barnstormers, that trick, somebody say, well, you know, I won't go until I have a foot in the ground, so they'd have a box of soil in a cigar box. So they pulled everything, and 25 cents, and then it got more expensive as the day went on. But they were the true barnstormers, they were all over.
So on the side, you would do the flying thing, pulling banners and stuff?
I did banner towing, yes. And then we had what they called a screecher, which was a big Spartan monoplane. And they had speakers in it, and the politicians and so on used to take and fly around. It was before the days of tape recorders and so on during election day, which wasn't very often, but once in a while. And then dusting also with the Eagle Rock. That was a pretty good duster, yeah.
But you did crop dusting?
Yeah, up in Aroostook County in Maine, yeah.
Is that one of those biplanes?
It was a biplane, yeah. And we used Paris green, which was a lead arsenate at that time, and a duster. So it was pretty primitive, but it did the job. They were potatoes they raised up there, yeah.
So you're trying to always doing aviation as part of what you did?
Yeah, I did in those days. I was young, yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
Now
Okay, now let's go into the balloons. Now this is a British. We always think of the Germans, of course, as brilliant. And look how fast they moved. In other words, here we are in 1916, semi-rigid, as you can see here, mostly semi. And then you see they started to hang a car under here, and it became more rigid. And then they kept doing, and this goes along. They had water ballast and all these good things on it. But then look, and then finally they came down here. This was 1970, and look, just in a couple of years, this was actually a rigid deal. This was the R-34 with the separate engines and everything. Look at how they advanced. You can just see in the pictures. So it wasn't the Germans alone that they got all the credit, and of course they carried it after the wars. But
Hindenburg,
British,
after the Hindenburg, they didn't do this much.
no, see, we did the Akron and the Macon, and that was done, of course, in Ohio. And, of course, they both got in thunderstorms and broke up, as you know. And that ended that. But the Hindenburg was well after that. But they had a very advanced design and so on. And they were fortunate in a way. They didn't have radar either, but they had good crews, and their only problem was they had hydrogen. They didn't have helium. So.
Now, when the war started out, a lot of the ports, like Seattle, had like little air.
These were good, the blimps.
Yeah.
The blimps were really good. Now, they weren't rigid, but they were very dependable, and they had hangars like at Tillamook, Oregon, Santa Ana, California, and so on. They were based there, and they were coastal patrol. And they carried some ash cans on them and so on. A few of them got knocked down. Submarines that come up and boom, but not many. And they had the Civil Air Patrol flying airplanes out there too, and they may or may not, but mostly spotting. Because I'll tell you, in the early days of the war, my God, these submarines would come right up to the surface and torpedo ships right off the coast. I mean, it was really something else.
You don't hear much of that about that.
No, but they did. In other words, as they said, you could see the fire line down that east coast where they were getting our shipping coming up the east coast. And then the balloons came in. The first they started coastal patrol with the CAP, and they didn't like airplanes. They got out of the way. And then the blimps went out and they took it over. They did a good job. That was cut back.
Did they also put up balloons like to protect airfields from being landed?
Not in this country. They did over in Europe. In other words, they put balloons and hung cables and stuff like that. That was from World War I, actually. They perfected that toward the end. But they hung cables and all kinds of stuff. And they had picket lines, they call them. And I don't know how effective they were. Maybe they snagged the German once they knew where they were. But that was not done. To my knowledge, it may have been. I don't think it was done in this country, but it was certainly done in England, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
And what's that biplane right there behind you?
Okay, this is Eddie Rickenbacker, and this is actually his signature and everything else. Pam has done all of this. She's gone out and tried to take and get authentic pictures and the signatures and so on.
Did you ever meet him?
Yes, I did. I met him. Oh, yes. I didn't know him well. He was my dad's friend, and from World War I. But he was president of Eastern Airlines. He took Eastern Airlines and he brought it up. Boy, he'd turn over in his grave if he saw what they did with Eastern. That was pure management. But anyhow, this is his deal all the way through, and of course he liked the SPADs and so on.
Wasn't Frank Borman with Eastern at one time? Or?
No, later on, but yeah, not really with them, yeah. And then here was this adversary right over here. Here's the Red Baron. Right? This was his adversary. He was on the German side. This was the Red Baron, and boy, he was an ace. Only at the cost. He knocked down the British airplanes. Boy, did he ever. Yeah. The Red Baron.
Aces have respect for each other, don't they? Even
Yeah, they did. Well, you know, in World War, it was interesting because in World War One, my daddy always said that if an American got down was with the Germans, they were well treated, or vice versa. And he had a fellow that got knocked down and joined the Americans. So they didn't keep him as prisoners; they just kept him and so on, back and forth. And the fellow had been in the shoe business over there, and in Germany. And of course, that was all in it. He went in the service too, and he and my dad became good friends. And after World War One, he actually bought lasts for my daddy, and so on. So you never know, do you, all the way through? Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, yeah.